It took only 3 bridge hacks last year in 2022 for crypto investors to lose a full $1 billion. Bridges are one of the most important protocols in blockchain tech. In fact, right now, it is the only mechanism by which to move money across chains. And the fact of the matter is that yes, it's important to be fast and cheap when it comes to bridging, but nothing is more important than safety. And if you're truly a quality bridge, you're going to reflect 3 specific characteristics. Today, we are looking at an important topic: where specifically bridges are vulnerable in their design and which bridges specifically are the safest. Plus, I'm going to present you with my personal choice and share the only bridge that I use with 100% confidence. Welcome to the channel. My name is Maddie and this is Altcoin Buzz. Best of luck as always if you choose to invest, but you know the deal. I'm not an official financial or investment advisor. And so this video is not official financial or investment advice. Okay, so most of us understand at really some kind of a base level that bridging in crypto means we're not just moving assets across chains. We've covered bridges extensively here on the channel, as well as the website. Check out altcoinbuzz.io for some of our write-ups. I'll link to these in the description below. But in many cases, the fact is that we're locking an asset on one chain, like BNB Smart Chain, for example, and minting it and all the relevant data to another chain, for example, like Polygon. Some bridges are faster than others, yes, and some bridges are cheaper than others, but just like when you cross a bridge in a car or any vehicle, when the asset is in transit, that's when it's vulnerable. And so bridges need constant monitoring and auditing to ensure that no bugs end up in the software, which could potentially lead to hacks. Again, remember those 3 major prominent hacks in 2022 that led to $1 billion in losses. And specifically, there are 3 places in any bridge where an exploit can happen. So they are: number 1, the relayer; number 2, the smart contract; and number 3, the blockchains themselves. The relayer is the group of network nodes that do the cross-chain transaction. So they lock, mint, burn, and unlock tokens and ensure that the data moves to the receiving chain. And the smart contract and blockchains are self-explanatory. If the contract on the chain is buggy, then very simply, you are at risk. Let's look at some examples here and consider those 3 high-profile bridge hacks that I mentioned from last year. So I think it's safe to say that these bridges were unlucky, but it could be argued that there was also a lack of diligence. Let's start with Ronin Bridge. So the Ronin Bridge hack in late March 2022 was by far the largest last year at about $600 million. Ronin, for those of you that are not into games, is the chain Sky Mavis built to run Axie Infinity. And the game, in fact, was so popular that it was bogging down the entire Ethereum network. If you partook, then you probably know what I'm talking about. So they created Ronin in response. It's an ETH sidechain, and that means it shares some properties. But to go from using ETH for gas to Ronin, or the 2 Axie game tokens of Axie and Smooth Love Potion, a user must bridge from ETH to Ronin. And the hack came from exploiting a validator node, then leading to a bridge hack and siphoning off of ETH. To their credit, Sky Mavis did reimburse users for their loss, so kudos to them. But the main lesson here is that there were too few validators, only 22, which really does demonstrate that Ronin is unfortunately one of the most centralized chains out there. But even on top of that centralization, there was bridge vulnerability, and so this was a recipe for disaster. Remember that you can avoid chains that are too centralized by looking up their Nakamoto coefficient. The Wormhole bridge was another prominent hack. This occurred in February of 2022. Wormhole was hacked for $320 million due to a vulnerability in some contracts on the Solana chain. Jump Trading, who is a big early investor in Solana, they reimbursed users to make them whole. And that led to really a big set of questions as to how centralized and how much of a VC chain Solana is that someone entirely outside of Solana would bail out the users. And those are valid questions to ask. But that is another topic for another day, another debate, arguably for another day. In this case, however, it all came down to a smart contract vulnerability. And then finally, the third major hack was the Multichain bridge. In fact, it was hacked twice. But in January 2022, it was for $3 million. And this hack was due to smart contract issues. So a pattern here of deficiencies is emerging, as you can see across these three examples. We're going to segue now by contrast into our favorite bridge, which is Wanchain, which does not have any of these problems, and I'm going to explain why in just a second. First of all, Wanchain is the safest bridge because it always controls the big three vulnerabilities that we talked about earlier. So first, its relayers are called Stormin nodes, and only they can do bridge transactions. And when a bridging transaction takes place, the nodes work together to be the relayer. They all do it together so that a hacker can't target one Stormin node in particular. Next, Wanchain's smart contracts are audited regularly and continuously to look for bugs and vulnerabilities, and there are none to report on. So that insistence on continuous auditing is really paying off. Now, Wanchain cannot control how secure the blockchains themselves are, but they choose to use only secure chains, and many chains including Bitcoin and the EVM chains. No Solana, for example. But not just that, Wanchain is also fast and cheap. With an L2 like Arbitrum, its bridge goes only to Ethereum. But Wanchain's ETH XFlows lets you bypass ETH entirely and go directly from L2 to L2 or L2 to other EVMs. In fact, the bridging transactions that you're watching in the background here right now are exactly this. This transaction is going from Polygon directly to Arbitrum without needing to go through ETH first. And you can clearly see how fast it is. The timestamps here say that it took 32 minutes. And between EVMs like Polygon to BSC, it's even faster. And also free, by the way. You can see that I sent $200 here and I got $200, $200 even. So based on Wanchain's own standards for maintaining its contracts and relayers, there is really no one in this industry that I'm personally more confident when it comes to bridging than Wanchain. I've been a fan of this project for a long time. We've talked about it for years now, and they just keep improving. But especially if you avail yourself of bridge mechanics in this crypto space, you must give Wanchain a try.